Hello, and welcome back to another great episode of Rebellion Health Podcast, Women's Edition, where we are excited today to talk a little bit about some fitness and nutrition. Two topics that Mandy and I both love and try to be good at sometimes, but
I just left
life
my
happens.
workout. I'm just going to brag because I just left my upper body workout and I came here and I don't look like complete crap.
Well, there's that. We learn how to turn it around real fast in this industry. Quick. Yeah. So I'm so excited about today's guest. We're going to jump right in. We have Brandon DaCruz. Did I say that correctly, Brandon?
Brandon DaCruz, but you're close.
DaCruz. Okay, sorry, I put a
She
lot
just wanted a little law in there.
A little southern
just added
in there.
a few extra.
Brandon DaCruz. And he is, I'm going to read his bio because it is so impressive that I don't want to leave out any important details. But Brandon's an online nutrition and physique coach, accredited nutritionist, internationally published fitness model, and national level NPC competitor. He's been featured in Men's Fitness Magazine, Muscular Development, Bodybuilding.com, and the Allen Aragon Research Review, where he's been a contributing author. He spent the last 16 years working in the coaching industry and believes in taking an evidence-informed approach. And I'm going to let him talk a little bit about that as we move forward. He also hosts a podcast called Chasing Clarity, which I love the name, Brandon.
Thanks.
By the way, that's what we're all about here. There's so much noise out there in this industry around fitness, nutrition. So Chasing Clarity is what we're all after. I've enjoyed listening to a few episodes just to get to know you a little bit better myself and to have some content for today's episode. And I will say, ladies, listening and looking at all his credentials, he knows what he's talking about. So as we jump right in, I'm going to let you finish and tell us a little bit about yourself, how you kind of came to where you are now, and the passion behind the work that you do.
Man, so ladies, first and foremost, I truly appreciate you guys having me on. It's an absolute honor, and I'm glad that we're able to represent Tennessee out here because I'm a newly formed resident. So I love this place, and I'm glad that we are being able to contribute to our local community within this conversation. But just a little bit of background about me. Like you guys mentioned, I'm an accredited nutritionist, an online physique coach, and fitness, nutrition, training. This has been my entire life. Like this has been my guiding passion in life, something that I've poured my all into. And it's really went from a passion to a complete profession. And I spent 10 plus years in the sports nutrition industry. So I did everything from national sales to, I used to formulate supplements, but that was a great career for like stability purposes. But really the entire time I was coaching people in person, at 4 to 6 a.m. in the morning, and then after work when I get off my shift. And eventually I was able to transition very early on into online coaching. So I got into the online coaching sphere in January of 2013. And just so everyone, if you're not really familiar and online coaching now, there really wasn't an industry then. People only really worked with people that were in your backyard. You had to have really good results in person. So I worked in gyms. I was able to establish a reputation, and I pretty much just focused on owning my backyard. And now I'm in a point 13 years later where I work with clients all over the world. So I have currently clients in 9 different countries. I'm working off 8 different time zones, and it's been a blessing from God, like to be able to reach so many people outside of just my small community or my small state. At that time I was in Jersey, but I take what I refer to as an evidence-informed approach. And what I mean by that is I blend what has been shown in the research with the real world. And really what I'm trying to be able to do is bridge the gap between scientific research and information and then practical application, because I really do believe that knowledge without application is useless, especially because, as you mentioned, there's so much misinformation, disinformation out there that the reason my show is called Chasing Clarity is because that's how has always been my main area of focus, being able to go and chase after the truth and then also be able to disseminate that information in a clear and concise manner to other people. So that's like from an educational perspective, but over the years I've worked with over 1,200 clients online, and that includes everyone from like physique, from Olympia level physiques, so people that have been on the top of the bodybuilding stage, to corporate executives in Silicon Valley, to other business owners, entrepreneurs, and lifestyle clients. And really my focus is helping people improve their body composition, optimize their performance, and enhance their health in a sustainable way. Whether the goal is fat loss or muscle gain or better performance, I'm really trying to help people build a healthier, more responsive body. And so my coaching is really rooted in structure, strategy, and long-term thinking. And a big part of my philosophy centers around what I refer to as a health-centric coaching model. And at the center of that model is the belief that a healthy body is a responsive body. So my belief set or my ideology or my approach really centers around the idea that if your physiology is supported, your metabolism is in a better place, and your nutrition and training are aligned, your body's going to respond better to whatever goal you have. And it's not only going to help you in the short term, but it's really going to help you in the long term. And that's something that I think is often overlooked in our industry, where people are looking for pills, powders, and potions and quick fixes for long-term issues that they have sustained.
I mean, you are speaking our language. So in so many ways, we work in the hormone optimization space. So a lot of what we do is looking at metabolic health and cardiometabolic health. And so tell us a little bit about when you have a client come to you and she's got, or he, because you coach both men and women,
Yes.
They have specific goals for their body composition or, reframing their composition, losing fat, building muscle, and they're looking at their nutrition and trying to dial that in. What are the ways that you know that this person is metabolically ready? Like, how do we know that their body is going to metabolically respond to the intervention?
Yeah, so really, first and foremost, it really comes down to what's called a needs analysis. So I go through a very comprehensive client intake process where I'm looking at, if I was to send you over the form, it's multiple pages long. And that's really also to be able to distinguish and delineate is if we're a good fit, first and foremost. But I'm looking at everything from their dieting history, their level of potential metabolic adaptation, what their hunger and appetite levels are, how long they've been out of a deficit, what their nutrition has looked like, and then other factors like body composition related. So what's their current muscle mass level and what's their training like? And then their sleep quality and sleep quantity. Really what I'm trying to see is a lot of people come to me, and I'm sure you ladies understand this and probably see these same goals. Everyone wants fat loss. Everyone wants a diet, and they constantly want to jump into a diet. And really, many people may want that intervention, but they're not in the place physiologically or psychologically to actually respond favorably to it. So I found that if these components are not in a good place, if they're in a poor place, the body is often less responsive to that deficit. It makes the fat loss process harder, and a person is not in the best position to succeed. So when I'm going through that new client intake process, I want to understand that person's dieting history. And that matters because really it's very rare. I work with say like 60% women and 40% men, but I could say this on both ends of the spectrum. It's very rare these days that I get someone that doesn't have an extensive history of dieting, they haven't went through chronic dieting cycles, or they haven't yo-yo dieted. And if a client wants to lose fat, one of the first things I want to know is how recently they were in a calorie deficit and how long that diet lasted. Because if you just came out of a long fat loss phase, it's very likely that you're still dealing with some of what are called diet-induced metabolic adaptations. And really what I mean by that is that there's multiple components of both our metabolism, our hormones, and then our appetite that are impacted from the effects of a deficit and losing body fat. So from an energy expenditure perspective, and this really is comprised of like your total daily energy expenditure, but people will colloquially call this their metabolism. All four parts of our total daily energy expenditure downregulate during a deficit. This is a natural survival response. So we see that basal metabolic rate tends to decrease as body mass comes down. Your thermic effective feeding starts to decrease because you're eating less calories, so there's less calories that need to be burned through the process of digestion and assimilation. Even like your exercise energy exercise energy expenditure, so the amount of calories you're burning through exercise decreases because you're becoming more efficient with movement. And then your non-exercise activity thermogenesis, which is like your spontaneous activity, when you're in a deficit and you've lost body weight, that is one of the largest components that gets downregulated, where most people don't understand and don't realize that. And that could be hundreds of calories per day that you're now burning less because you're now spontaneously moving less. You're more slouched. You're less animated. Like I'm speaking with my hands right now, but I'm in a surplus. So like if I was in a deficit, you would see I would be moving much slower. I'd probably blink slower. There's many components that a lot of people don't contribute or don't associate with calorie burn that get downregulated. Now on the opposite side, and this is something that you guys probably see quite often, we have hormonal adaptations to a deficit. So we're going to see things like changes in sex hormones, like testosterone is going to decline, estradiol, progesterone. These are all going to fall. We're going to see reductions in thyroid output and thyroid conversion, which generally will manifest on labs as reductions in T3 levels, especially free T3 levels. And then a lot of people will also have higher cortisol levels. And these hormonal changes can affect energy levels, recovery, mood, and then particularly with women, we're going to see that it affects their menstrual cycle regularity. So that could be an elongation of their menstrual cycle, so we can get oligoamenorrhea, or in some women, they suffer from what's called hypothalamic amenorrhea, where it's the cessation of a menstrual cycle for 90 days or longer. Now, if I have someone come to me in a position where any of these hormonal markers or any of these energy expenditure markers are off, they are still suffering the metabolic adaptations of their previous diet. They have not taken enough time to restore, and that's a major sign that they are not metabolically ready to go into a fat loss phase, and their body's not in a responsive state. And this is really important to understand because this could really hinder the results that this person gets. So I'm looking at how long have they been out of a deficit? What does their current nutrition look like? Because most people will need a meaningful amount of time at maintenance, and in some cases in a surplus, to truly be in a good place to respond metabolically, and especially if the goal is fat loss. And that time at or above maintenance gives us a chance to restore their physiology, to reverse the metabolic adaptations from the last diet, and then also other like biofeedback markers. So we want to see reduced diet fatigue, we want to see improved performance, and we also want to be able to improve their body composition through better training quality and better recovery. Then when it comes to, I also do like a physique analysis. I want to see, because people come to me with very specific goals, and I like that. I want them to send me pictures of either their best physique they've ever attained or someone that is reasonable and realistic, but something they're aspiring for. I want people to have goals that we can have a target to really move ourselves forward in. And it's very important that I consider that person's current level of muscle mass and their quality of their training, because a lot of people say that they want to get leaner, but when you actually look at their goal physique, which is why I often do this in a photo manner, like I have them send me photos, their goal physique is one that is not only lower in body fat, but has a lot higher level of muscle mass than that person has currently. So I have to assess whether fat loss is actually the next best move or whether they'd be better served spending time building muscle first. Because if someone diets down, but they don't have that muscular foundation to create the look they want, they often end up disappointed. And I can't tell you how many times someone has come to me and said, I've done consecutive fat loss phase after consecutive fat loss phase, and I never feel like I get the return on investment. I put the time, the energy, I stay very strict, I'm very adherent, but the biggest missing factor or the biggest issue or hindrance or bottleneck in their ability to achieve their physique goal is not that they need to lose more fat. They've gotten lean. They just don't have the muscle under it to be able to actually show the shape, the proportions, and the physique that they're looking for. And then from like a lifestyle perspective, I really think that one thing that is overlooked and undervalued, but is very necessary to be metabolically responsive, to be able to lose fat efficiently and build muscle effectively, is to look at your sleep quality and sleep quantity. Before I ever take someone into a physique focused phase, I want to know what their sleep quality and their quantity looks like, because sleep is one of the foundational pillars of a responsive physiology. We see almost every single area is impacted negatively with poor sleep. So we'll see an increase in hunger and cravings. We see tanked recovery. We even will see skewing in hormones like thyroid, testosterone, leptin, things like that from poor sleep. And so we want to make sure that we're not putting the cart before the horse. And a lot of people are trying to force fat loss or force a specific body composition change when their physiology is not in the place to do so. So if we can really focus on what I call a constraints-led approach. Let's look at the bottlenecks in your physiology. Let's work on improving your habits, behaviors, decisions, and actions to be able to improve and optimize the foundation at which you have. And then from there, we can look at implementing more advanced interventions to really push you in the direction that you want to be. But now we're going to coax your body into the lean muscular physique you want rather than trying to force it.
I have some questions around sleep.
Absolutely.
I am very protective of my sleep, like to the point where my family gets a little frightened if I'm not within my zones of sleep, which is fine because I like them to be a little scared.
Yeah.
But with that being said, I've worked in a corporate world the majority of my career. It used to be a badge of honor before I realized that it wasn't, to grind as hard as you can. If you woke up and said, I only got 4 hours sleep, well, you got a badge. Mm-hmm. So to somebody who may not be a fitness enthusiast or a competitor, which I've done that too, but that's when I learned to sleep. Yeah. But fitness enthusiasts, and they are in that corporate world, they're in that grind, they're in that, I've got to get as much done in that 24-hour day as humanly possible. What would you say to those people who find that to be a badge and rewire their brain, their way of thinking?
Absolutely. So first and foremost, I want to say that I can completely relate to that. I spent over a decade living and working in Manhattan. And at one time, it was sleep is for the weak, or I'll sleep when I'm dead. And it was a mentality that if I could just extend my work days, and I'll tell you this personally, I was the worst or the best example of someone that sacrificed sleep to climb the corporate ladder. I was traveling 65,000 miles a year. There was many years I was on the road 40 weeks per year because I was national sales director, and I was building a coaching business. So I used to fall asleep on my laptop every night. But I saw the ramifications of that in terms of blood glucose markers, insulin values, triglycerides, all these different metabolic markers. And there was really a lot of writing on the wall. As a health and physique coach, there's nothing bigger or more alarming than when you see a bunch of reds on your lab work. It's like,
Yeah.
all right, we got to do something about
Yeah.
this. But really, to reframe this, a lot of people don't realize how well they could feel until they go through a period of time where they've really optimized their sleep, their nutrition, their training, their movement. And one of the biggest factors is that sleep, because there's so many people that are walking around essentially sleep deprived, under recovered, and overstressed, and they don't realize it. They've essentially adapted to it. And so you might take it on the chin and say, yeah, this is a badge of honor, or I can do this. I'm the anomaly. But really, when we look at the literature at people that get away with short sleep, that genetic SNP or that polymorphism is about 4% of the population. So honestly, if we look at the average, if only 4% have it and 96% don't, it's more likely than not that you're not in that genetic elite and that you are suffering ramifications of short sleep. And there's so many benefits from actually optimizing or at least improving your sleep. This isn't to make this a dichotomous relationship where it's either you sleep 8 hours a night or you sleep 4 and nothing in the middle is great. It's even if you can get a 1 hour to 2 hour sleep improvement over time and just kind of escalate things really in terms of maybe shifting back your sleep time, like the time you go to bed, and just really giving yourself a longer duration to be in bed. But there's so many positive downstream implications from that. Now, if you're just a corporate executive and you aren't really into health and fitness, you'll see enhancements in cognition, in executive function, in memory formation, and especially memory consolidation, meaning that you will be able to not only form memories better, but remember things longer term. And so I remember I did a lot of presentations. I used to fly all over the country to give presentations on supplements. And I was that person sleeping 4 or 5 hours a night. And I cannot tell you in comparison, now I do presentations where I got flown out to speak on nutrition related topics, but it's in front of large crowds and stuff. And the amount of prep work the amount of times I have to rehearse my actual presentation for one of those now that I'm someone that sleeps 7.5 hours a night compared to when it was 4 or 5 hours a night, there was many times that I just didn't feel as sharp. So from a cognitive perspective, there's vast benefits. And also if we look at actual cognitive decline, we see that short sleep is one of the leading markers or indicators or predictors of Alzheimer's and dementia. So, not to get fatalistic, but that is something that we really need to be cognizant of. But then from a body composition perspective, a lot of people think that, it's just the total sleep duration and these things don't matter as long as you're in a deficit. And yes, you can have the same calorie deficit and lose the same amount of weight, whether you're in short sleep or long sleep. And there's actually a great research study from 2010 that looks at this, where they put the same individuals in a crossover trial. So they went through 2 weeks at the same deficit, but in different sleep conditions. Same people, same deficit, same diet. And in one condition, they got 8.5 hours of sleep. So that was the optimal sleep condition. And the other, they were at 5.5 hours of sleep, which is what a lot of people that are busy in corporate America are getting. And they found that the body fat to lean mass loss distribution was completely shifted. So in the short sleep condition, they lost 55% more of their weight from lean mass, meaning including muscle, than they did fat mass. Whereas when it was in the opposite end of the spectrum, when they had 8.5 hours a night of sleep, they lost 80% of the same amount of weight from fat and only 20% from lean mass. So we see that what is called nutrient partitioning, or the P ratio. Essentially, where is the weight being lost? Is it from lean mass or is it from fat mass? And we want to exclusively lose from fat mass because that is what's going to preserve your metabolically active muscle, which is also going to contribute to your metabolism. Then we look at like sleep and hunger indices. One of the biggest contributors to higher hunger, especially if you're at maintenance or in a surplus, is actually short sleep. And it also drives up cravings because it's essentially like an energy seeking mechanism where your body's telling you you're short on energy from a sleep perspective. You're essentially suffering from sleep debt. And so it pushes you to look for excess calories. So we have great interventions which look at optimal sleep versus short sleep, and seeing that people will generally consume between 500 to 600 calories more unconsciously. So they are not meaning to do this. It's just through their normal habits. They think they're eating their normal, ad libitum intake, but the hunger, the appetite, and the cravings that they're experiencing during short sleep conditions are exacerbating and causing them to subconsciously eat more. So if we look at any variety, we could look at blood glucose measurements, you could look at insulin sensitivity. All these things are suffering ramifications from short sleep. So it's not a badge of honor. And honestly, you would be so much more productive. And I can say this for myself as someone that I literally have Aura data that shows that I slept 1 year. My Aura data was 4 hours and 57 minutes. I'm not proud of that whatsoever. But the last couple of years, it's been 7 to 7 hours and 30 minutes. And I get so many more things done despite if you just looked at it in paper, you'd say Brandon has 2.5 less hours on it out of his day because he sleeps more. But I'm so much more productive, so much more keyed in, and also I'm much less emotionally reactive as a result of getting really high quality sleep. And that's something you have to look at as a lifelong investment into yourself.
Absolutely. I think I also have an aura, so does Mandy, and I always love it when my sleep debt is zero, or I'm like in the positive, like away from the sleep debt, So that's one of my favorite features of the aura is being able to track my sleep and able to understand the REM versus the non-REM and the deep sleep and the latency period and all of that. But let's shift a little bit to, you talked a lot about hunger cues and hormones. Let's shift a little bit to nutrition, because I know you commented to me that you'd like to maybe focus a little bit on some mistakes that you see women make. Because, oftentimes in our clinic, we hear women say, I haven't changed anything. I eat pretty good. I don't really eat bad. But there's not a really great understanding sometimes of what it takes nutritionally to be able to see that stimulus in the muscle perform or build and lower the fat. So talk a little bit about that for us.
Absolutely. So when it comes to nutrition related mistakes, I'll say that there's probably two that I see most commonly. And I work with clients around the world, and I've worked with well over 500 women over the years. So I've seen a lot of examples of women that feel like they're trying really hard, but they're actually not seeing the results they want. And they almost feel like they're not getting the return on investment that they would expect. And really when it comes from, I really like to empower women, because a lot of women have made a mistake of just chronically dieting. And they're not getting a yield out of that. They're essentially in this downregulated state. Their hormones are trashed. Their recovery is very poor. They feel terrible. And it's not just chronic dieting, but then it's putting them in a situation where they're underfueling during the week and then overeating on the weekends. Like they break. Like it's almost like they're able to ride it out and white knuckle it for a period of time. But then this is what I call like the weekday dieter, meaning that during the week, Monday through Friday, they're on point, they're restricting themselves, they feel like they're making progress. And then on the weekends, they can't take it anymore. And they go off the rails and they have, fried foods and alcohol, and they're suffering from disinhibition. But I think that really stems from the fact that many women make the mistake of, when they're trying to build muscle, they're chronically underfueling. And I work with a lot of high performing women, including lifestyle clients, competitors, corporate executives, and then other business owners. And many of them come to me wanting to build a lean, strong, athletic physique. But they're trying to do this while chronically under eating most of the time. They're on low calories, they're doing a ton of activity, they're stacking on fitness class after fitness class, they feel like they're really getting after it. But then they're wondering why their body isn't changing the way that they want it to. And the reality is very simple. You're not going to build a strong, lean, muscular physique in a chronic state of what's called a low energy availability, meaning you're not supplying yourself with enough of the energetic resources to support your physiology and then support the process of muscle growth, because muscle tissue is metabolically expensive. It requires both a strong training stimulus, adequate recovery, but then enough energetic resources coming in to support the actual process of that growth. Now, the secondary factor that I see is that a lot of women focus heavily on fat loss, first and foremost. But as I alluded to earlier in this podcast, a lot of people don't have the requisite level of muscle mass to actually achieve the physique they want. So this is where I really try to encourage women to spend some period of time building muscle, to go into a building phase, to forget, I really like to express it as this. I want to shift you from a mindset of subtraction and restriction into a mindset of abundance and addition. And what I mean by that is I'm really trying to get them away from always thinking about getting smaller or seeing the scale go down, and really trying to embrace a different type of periodization where there's times of strategically eating more and fueling your training and fueling your body and pushing for strategic growth. And then there's times to diet, but the time to diet is actually the minority of the year, not the majority of the year. And so I really think that a lot of women make the mistake of being afraid of strategic building phases. And this is something actually, we have a mutual friend, Hillary Quinn,
yes.
And I'm taking her currently through a building phase, and she's done phenomenally. But she was someone that was in that very similar position before we started working together. A lot of women like herself, they want to look lean, toned, and athletic, but they keep trying to get there through dieting alone. And what I have to often explain to them is, if you want to look lean, you need something to reveal, and that means you need enough muscle. And in most cases, that requires spending time at maintenance calories or in a slight surplus, fueling yourself properly and pushing your training performances so you can actually build the muscular foundation that will give you the shape and look that you want later on. And the unfortunate truth is that too many women stay stuck in those perpetual dieting cycles. They're chronically and constantly trying to chase smaller or a lighter scale weight version of themselves. And really all that yields for many is just a smaller, scrawnier version of themselves, because they never take enough time out of a deficit to properly fuel themselves, to create the physiological and energetic runway that they need for growth. And so that's why I'm a really big fan of this nutritional periodization, where there's lean building phases incorporated in, there's dieting phases, but they're strategic, they're phasic, and they're planned. And that really allows us to focus on different goals at different times that stack on top of one another and potentiate the results of it, but we're never staying in one phase too long where you're inducing very substantial adaptations, especially from like a metabolic perspective.
You mentioned the scale. Ooh.
I don't get on the scale.
I don't either. but there was a time where that was the only way I knew I was winning.
Right.
Is if that scale was moving in the direction I wanted it to. I have since learned that a better number is maybe how my clothes are fitting.
Mm-hmm.
Or, how much energy I have during the day. Those are better numbers than the scale. But tell me, how do you get your people to realize that number on that scale? Because also, I can have way more muscle, a smaller waist, and a higher number on the scale.
Absolutely.
So when that happens, I'm like, am I losing? Oh gosh, it's like a panic point. It is some kind of thing that's in your brain that says, you're losing, even though you see you're winning. So what does that conversation sound like?
All right, so first and foremost, I always will have the conversation and open up with. I'm a very direct individual, and I like to be very clear and concise with individuals and really let them know what I'm thinking, but also give them very much informed consent. So when it comes to the metrics that I track a vast variety of metrics, and it's going to depend really on that person. So there are things from subjective and objective metrics. There's numerical based metrics that are quantitative, but then also qualitative. And I really, as I've gotten deeper into coaching, I'm really more focused on biofeedback and performance than I ever will be scale weight. And I always try to get across to clientele, whether it's, and mind you, women do tend to have a more misguided relationship or interpretation of the scale, but I will say this very objectively and honestly, many men do too. So that's not something that is just female specific. But I really try to get across the fact that the scale is not the end-all be-all metric of tracking progress. It is a data point that has many factors that will influence it. So a lot of times, one of the first things I do is I have a full comprehensive podcast on factors that are not involved in fat gain or fat loss that will influence the scale. And that includes things like stress, like your sleep quality at night, the timing of your last meal, your sodium intake, your bowel movements, your menstrual cycle, what phase of your cycle you're in. These are all things that have no energetic content to them, meaning they're not adding fat nor are they removing fat, but they can influence your scale weight fluctuations, as can training. Training very hard, you can have what's called training-induced edema. And many women will notice that when they're in a cycle of training, progressive resistance training, where they're specializing or they're focusing, especially on lower body being such a large musculature, they will see an increase in their scale weight the next day. Although their glutes look rounder, their quads look more feathered, and they're getting better shape. And so that's not an indication that we can use. We can't use that as the be-all, end-all metric of tracking progress. So I really try to have people focus on different metrics. So first thing I'm looking at are visuals. I'm a body composition coach. I'm not a body weight coach. So first I'm looking at a comparative analysis of their actual photos, and in very particular circumstances where things are standardized, from the lighting to the location to the poses that they do. So I'm looking at comparative analysis, and then I point out the differences that I see, because it's very difficult as you yourself to be able to be an objective assessor of your progress. You see yourself every day, but I'm a third party individual. I'm a second set of eyes, and I have no dog in this fight. You know what I mean? So I'm going to look at things in a very objective manner and tell you things that are improving or things that we have to work on. So visuals are very important. Then biofeedback. How do you feel in terms of your energy levels, your clarity of mind, your performance, your recovery status, your sleep, your stress levels? All these things are an amalgamation of whether you're moving in the right direction or not. Then we have to heavily focus on training performance. Are you getting either progressively stronger or you're performing better over time? And that could be in a multitude of variables. So that could be that you're adding reps to the same amount of load per set every week, or you're able to lift the same exercise, you're able to do more load or more weight for less reps. So you're seeing a progression, and that's just an indication of progressive overload. Or we can look at your technique, your execution. Are you doing the specific exercise that we're working on to target a particular muscle group? Are you doing it with better form, better execution, better cadence, so tempo? So there's many variables that we can look at. And then the other one that you mentioned, and it's spot on, is your clothing. A lot of times, unless you're someone that doesn't know how to wash clothes as an adult, which most people know how at this point.
It happens.
you're going to be able to be objective and say, all right, you know what? This blouse fits, much looser on my waist, or in different cases, like this is like the perfect example. I will have women that tell me like their tops fit looser in their waist, but their pants fit tighter in their glutes. And that's just an indication that we're undergoing what's called body recomposition, which is the addition of lean mass with this simultaneous loss in body fat. So you're losing fat off your waist, you may be losing it off your arms, but you're gaining muscle in your glutes, or some women I'll take through specialization cycles. So we're looking at very particular muscle groups. So then I'm looking at photos that highlight those muscle groups, as well as clothing that they have from the beginning of their process. That's one thing I always tell clients: do not throw out the clothes that you started with, because I always want that as a measurement or a metric of progress later on. So you can see if you lost 20 or 30 pounds, like it's going to show up substantially in your clothes. And then also with that comes more of a mental perspective, but how confident do you feel in your skin? One of the best questions, or my favorite questions that I send clients when they go on a vacation, especially when we've went through like a body transformation process, is how confident did you feel with yourself? How comfortable did you feel on your day-to-day when you were away? And also, how did how'd you feel in comparison to previous vacations? Did you feel like you were more confident in presenting yourself, or how you looked in dresses, or things of that sort? And I think that's a very important concept or thing to talk about with clientele, because a lot of times we don't acknowledge our wins. I work with a lot of like high-level executive women that run companies, and they're doing everything. They're burning the candle at both ends, to be honest. But they're so harsh on themselves, and they're the biggest and harshest critic of themselves, that oftentimes they're really good at saying what they're not doing well, but they really suffer, or it's very difficult for them to acknowledge what they are doing well and the successes and the accomplishments and the progress they're making. So a lot of times it's my job to try to bring that out of them in a way that I'm not just directly telling them, yes, I'm going to compliment you, I'm going to give you positive feedback, and I'm going to build you up. But at the same time, sometimes I need to prompt you with questions that are going to cause you to be retrospective and reflective, and realize just how far you've come yourself.
That's a great point. Brandon, I see a lot of women that, they come to me because they feel changes. And a lot of times they feel changes in their body with their weight composition or body composition in general. And maybe they haven't made the best choices. Maybe they haven't really focused on fitness or nutrition. And now suddenly they've gained 20 pounds overnight because they're in menopause. And so, which is very common that I hear that in the office. And so, what would you tell someone to give them? I really love the fact that our podcast, we like to bring hope to our listeners. But what would you tell a woman who comes in to see me, and she has gained 20 pounds overnight, not really, put a lot of focus on herself? She's been taking care of children or parents or working a full-time job. What would you tell her to bring her some hope for how she can still, it's not too late. She can still improve. But what would you, as a fitness expert and a nutrition expert, what would you tell them to give them some hope?
Absolutely. So I have this conversation probably every day. I will tell you I have a lot of back end stats that I run on my clientele base, and 60% of my clientele are women. And then the average age of the person that I work with is 48 years old as of my roster right now. So I'm working with a demographic of women, especially that are going through perimenopause or really transitioning into menopause, because at least in my clinical experience, I'm seeing a lot of people that are transitioning into menopause a little bit earlier than I did previously. If you look at the average age of menopause, the literature shows 51 to 52 years old, but I have personally seen younger women than that, a few years. But I always try to get across the fact that anything is possible if you are willing to make a change. And so what may have worked, it's really about unlearning what you've done previously and being willing and open-minded to taking a different approach going forward. One conversation I find myself often having with women that are in that transitionary period, so they're in their late 40s into their mid 50s, is what you did previously may have gotten you a result, but it's no longer getting you that result. So we need to do something differently. It can't be just about quick fixes. It can't be about aggressive deficits and aggressive diets and really trying to just focus on scale weight alone, because, not to be fatalistic, but at that point or that juncture in life, you are more susceptible to lean mass loss or to bone mineral density loss. And that is not going to be recoverable if you consecutively do that like you did in your 20s. Your body's a little bit less forgiving. However, the really encouraging part of this is that our bodies are so adaptable, both positively and negatively. So it adapts to your habits, your behaviors, your actions, and your decisions. And if you decide to take a step forward and make better habits around nutrition, lifestyle, training, movement, and you do things that are conducive for your physiology, for your development, and you can look at this as a long-term investment, meaning it's not just about the short term. It's not what I can do for 6 or 8 weeks. It's what can I do for the next 12 months. It will have positive compounding effects where you're essentially looking at this as a bank or an investment portfolio, where you are investing into your body composition, into your lean muscle mass, into your longevity, into your functionality, and really looking at this as treating your body as a lifelong partner. I find that many people 40 and below, they kind of look at their body as something that, I don't want to say it's like interchangeable, but they're not looking at it in the same light as, hey, I got to be in the same body for the rest of my life, and I can't be taking sacrifices or doing things that could potentially compromise my functionality, my health, my risk, or my injury risk, things of that sort. And then after 40, people start realizing, hey, I don't know how long I'm going to be able to continue with the sleep deprivation or, the high intensity workouts or the alcohol, misuse and things of that sort. So really, I try to get across to women that it's never too late. I've literally had women on my roster, 60 plus years and older, that have gotten into photo shoot shape. I have many women in their 50s that are past menopause or postmenopausal that are in the best shapes of their lives. And that's really come from a strategic approach. We build a better foundation through a primer phase, which is this phase that I really focus on restoring physiology that could be looking at addressing hormonal markers and referring them to people like yourself so we can optimize things from their internal physiology, and then also me being able to work in conjunction with that with nutritional modifications and supplement modifications, lifestyle and training. But at the same time, it's very encouraging, and this is something I do try to highlight. I have a full series on women and really looking at the women across the life course for my podcast. And what's really encouraging, and many people don't highlight, and I think it's a little bit neglectful to not do so, is we have research looking at pre-menopausal, perimenopausal, and postmenopausal women, and looking at the likelihood of fat loss with controlled interventions. And they all lose fat at the same rate, and they have the same potential for fat loss as long as adherence is dialed in. So you have the potential to make the same type of progress that you may have made in your late 30s if you're in your early 50s. You just may have to take a different approach. Recovery might have to be more prioritized. Sleep might have to be more prioritized. Looking at hormonal markers, I have many women that come to me and they're 40 to 45. They've never gotten a lab panel done. They've never looked at their hormones. So now we have to be a little bit more comprehensive in our approach, dive deep and not overlook the symptoms that you're suffering with. I think that's one thing that I often encourage clients to do is be their biggest health advocate, and 2, for us to be more like investigators. Like if you don't think something's right, we need to speak up for it and not, in the years past, like, especially when I first got into coaching, I felt like a lot of physicians used to gaslight some of my clients. And I was in a position where I couldn't refer out to anyone else. There were no health clinics like yourself, to be honest. I remember the first time I was able to get in contact with a wellness clinic for clients. It was 2016 or 2017, and we had to drive out into Manhattan. And it's a blessing that the industry has changed so much. But it's really about being able to go after every vector and optimizing each component and really pulling up each lever. So the first thing I'm going to focus on is nutrition, building a whole foods based diet that's really going to be complete from a macronutrient and micronutrient perspective. I'm going to make sure that they're nutritionally complete and that we have all the necessary vitamins, minerals, and cofactors that are needed for enzymatic processes like hormone creation and conversion. But then from there, we're going to look at training and making sure that we're training in a manner that is conducive for their specific goals. I find a lot of women are not training in alignment with what they actually want. So they're doing what feels like the most fatiguing or the hardest workout. So this could be HIIT classes or HIIT cardio, but it's not actually congruent with the actual physique that they're looking for. So we have to switch things. We have to go for more progressive resistance training. Then I'm a big fan of movement. So this doesn't have to be high intensity cardio, but like post-meal walks, things that are going to help with your insulin sensitivity, with your energy expenditure levels, and then also with body composition, and then looking at the lifestyle factors. So that's going to be sleep and especially stress management. I do a lot of work with meditation or with breath work and things that are going to really help with nervous system recovery, because I find that a lot of, especially women, I can say this objectively as someone that's coached, so many men and women in today's society are way more stressed and under so much more physiological and psychological stress than men are. A lot of women are, these are 2-parent households that are both, it's dual income. So it's not of the days like, maybe 10 or 15 years ago when I first started training clients, I had a lot of stay-at-home moms. So their one, role essentially was homemaker. Now I have women that are like corporate executives that have 3 kids, that are flying all over the country, that are trying to balance their relationship with their son or with their children, and then also their husband, and they're super stressed. So a big component of that lifestyle design is optimizing sleep, but also working on stress recovery, as well as stress management and resilience. And then beyond that, then looking at more invasive metrics, looking at blood work, making sure that they're taking good care of themselves internally. They're getting the hormonal support that they need so that every single system can be firing, and we can really get them firing on all cylinders so that they can optimize, their body composition and get the results that they're looking for.
Thank you.
Yes, I mean, this has been a wealth of knowledge that, we could talk for hours to you, and I'm going to continue to follow you online and social media. I love listening to your podcast, as I mentioned. So, Brandon, tell people how they can find you.
Absolutely. So first and foremost, the best place to find me, as you just alluded to, for deep dive podcasts, I go through so many different conversations. If you're interested in training, nutrition, metabolism, health optimization, you guys can find me on Spotify or iTunes at the Chasing Clarity Health and Fitness Podcast. Then for daily educational content, the best place to follow me is on Instagram, which would be at Brandon DaCruz_. And then for high-level one-on-one coaching, please feel free to reach out to me. I'm very responsive through email, and that is at bdacruzfitness@gmail.com.
Love it.
Awesome. Hey, thank you so much. This has been a fun topic for me to learn from you and to bring to our listeners. And I know Mandy probably feels the same way.
Yeah.
We live and breathe it all day long. So any little tidbit of knowledge that we can gain from someone like you is helpful for us. So thank you to our listeners. And until next time, we'll see you then.